commercial influence and grounded in journalistic integrity, because trust in news matters now more than ever.
8:59 here at News 88.7. Good morning. 45 in that HOV as you approach I-10 downtown area. Reports of an accident. I can see some delays in that area. Sunny today. Low 60s for the high. That is it. Been seeing some windy conditions this morning. That's going to go into Tuesday and Wednesday with 20 to 30 mile an hour gusts. Tonight's low near 40, back into the 70s for Tuesday, Wednesday, going to the mid 80s for Thursday. And it's going to be sunny all week. We're sitting at 46 right now. Streaming live online at HoustonPublicMedia.org. Download our app as well. It's KUHF Houston News 88.7. A service at the University of Houston. Houston Matters starts right now. Stick around, 9 o'clock.
After the U.S. Supreme Court struck down some of President Trump's tariffs Friday, he now says he'll raise them across the board under different legal authority. I'm Craig Cohen. Today on Houston Matters, the implications of tariff policy on Greater Houston's economy.
Houston Matters with Craig Cohen is a production of Houston Public Media with support from Baylor College of Medicine.
Also this hour, a new exhibit highlights the history and culture surrounding black baseball in Houston during segregation. We learn more. Plus, we talk with reporters about a number of developments in K-12 education. And Houston Chronicle sports editor Reid Laymance joins us to recap the Winter Olympics. Thanks for joining us on News 88.7. Remember to check out our live video feed on Houston Public Media's YouTube channel. We'll start with a news update from NPR and News 88.7. Stay with us.
Live from NPR News, I'm Corva Coleman. A blizzard continues to pound the eastern seaboard from Maryland to Maine. Bruce Conviser reports from New Jersey the storm has paralyzed air and ground travel in the Northeast.
From Washington to Boston, thousands of flights have been canceled. Public transportation on the ground has also come to a halt. New Jersey Transit has suspended all rail, light rail, and bus service, and Long Island Railroad has also suspended its rail service. Blizzard warnings have been posted from Delaware to New Hampshire. Much of the region is expected to get 1 to 2 feet of snow.
Bruce Conviser reporting. Meanwhile, an atmospheric river is storming into the Pacific Northwest and Northern California. Forecasters say it's bringing heavy rain and now a chance of flash flooding. The Transportation Security Administration says its pre-check program at airports will continue. That's despite an announcement yesterday from the Department of Homeland Security halting some of its other travel programs. NPR's Luke Garrett explains.
DHS suspended its global entry program for air travelers and airport security escorts for Congress members early Sunday morning. The department initially announced that TSA would halt pre-check security lines, but DHS quickly walked this back, causing confusion at airports and online. In a statement, TSA said its pre-check program will remain open and they will evaluate service on a, quote, case-by-case basis. Beyond travel, DHS is also suspending all non-disaster-related FEMA funding. DHS Secretary Kristi Noem blamed congressional Democrats for the program cuts, but Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer responded saying the Trump administration is, quote, choosing to inflict pain on the public instead of adopting common-sense ICE reforms. The partial government shutdown has now entered its second week with no sign of a DHS funding deal. Luke Garrett, NPR News, Washington.
Stocks opened lower this morning amid fresh uncertainty over tariff policy. NPR's Scott Horsley reports the Dow Jones Industrial Average fell about 400 points in early trading.
U.S. Customs officials say they will stop collecting emergency tariffs just after midnight tonight, following Friday's Supreme Court ruling that those tariffs are illegal. Importers who paid those tariffs over the last year will be looking for refunds, although the process for that has yet to be established. President Trump moved quickly to replace the outlawed tariffs with a new set of import taxes, set at 15%. By law, those tariffs can remain in place for only 5 months, unless Congress votes to extend them. A 15% tariff would represent a discount for goods from some countries, but an increase for other products. That leaves U.S. businesses and trading partners in some doubt about what future levies will look like. Scott Horsley, NPR News, Washington.
A federal judge has permanently blocked the release of a report into President Trump's handling of classified documents. The judge says releasing the report would be unjust to Trump and his 2 co-defendants. The case had been dismissed. It was investigated by former special counsel Jack Smith. You're listening to NPR.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, supporting creative people and effective institutions committed to building a more just, verdant, and peaceful world. More information is at macfound.org.
Live from News 88.7 in Houston, I'm Matt Harab. Firefighters are walking the perimeter of a wildfire on the northeast side of town right now, trying to get a better idea of the size of the blaze and how much has been contained. Last night, officials were telling some folks around Greens Bayou and John Ralston Road that they might need to evacuate. Those evacuations never panned out. As of last night, 30% of the blaze was contained and over 175 acres had burned, but again, we're waiting on those updated numbers. A town hall hosted by State Representative Jolanda Jones late last week brought out many from the North Riverside Terrace to oppose the construction of a gas station convenience store on the corner of Southmore and Live Oak. Among those speaking was newly elected Congressman Christian Menefee.
So the commitment y'all have for me is that I will be on the ground working alongside our fantastic public servants to stop this from happening. Look, we know that there's already several gas stations within just a couple-mile radius of where this location is. We've seen the type of traffic that has been attracted to the gas stations that are over there closer to 288.
Residents say other gas stations in the area are attracting gangs and illicit activity. And the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo kicked off festivities this weekend with its annual Wine and Best Bites competition. News 88.7's Natalie Weber was there.
Hundreds of Houstonians descended on NRG Center last night to sample food and wines. Tom Kilgore opened a winery in North Texas with his wife 2 years ago.
I think the Texas wine industry is really having a moment. I think we're starting to get some recognition that folks are kind of noticing us.
It's Kilgore's first year participating in the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo.
We've had the opportunity to go around and sample some wines and some foods. You couldn't have a better time than coming here. It's amazing.
The celebrations will continue this week with the rodeo's annual barbecue contest starting on Thursday. I'm Natalie Weber, News 88.7.
Cold morning to start this Monday, 46 degrees here on the UH campus, and we're only going to get up to 62 today. I'm Matt Harab, News 88.7.
This is Houston Matters. I'm Craig Cohen. Thanks for joining us here on News 88.7 and Houston Public Media's YouTube channel. Coming up this hour, we learn about an exhibit highlighting baseball history and culture in Freedmanstown. We discuss developments in K-12 education with 3 education reporters. Plus, Houston Chronicle sports editor Reid Laymance joins us to recap the Winter Olympics. First, though, President Trump this weekend said he intends to raise global tariffs from 10 to 15%, claiming authority under the Trade Act of 1974. The move comes after the U.S. Supreme Court in a 6-3 ruling Friday struck down tariffs the president imposed under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. The High Court concluded he did not have the authority to do that. Tariff policies, of course, can affect everyone from those who pay those tariffs to those who pass those costs on to every consumer choice we make about the products we buy. To discuss the implications of these developments for greater Houston and the broader Texas economy, we're joined now by Dietrich Vollrath, chair of the economics department at the University of Houston. Dietrich, welcome.
Well, thanks for having me, Craig.
Does the president's plan to up global tariffs mean for businesses and consumers, even after Friday's Supreme Court ruling, that not much has really changed?
Yes, not much has really changed. I think that's the right way to see it. It hasn't necessarily raised tariffs. It's raised tariffs on some countries. It's going to lower tariffs on others because the result, the new tariff being levied under the new authority is a flat 15%, as opposed to having country-specific tariffs that had been levied before. So there's going to be some reshuffling, but I think in the same way that there was not some immediate, crazy impact last April or in those couple months that followed, I don't think you're going to experience something. You're not going to go to the store tomorrow and see some substantial change in the prices you're paying.
Houston is, of course, a major hub for exports, energy exports in particular. We have one of the largest ports in the country. When tariffs are in flux like this, what does that uncertainty do on a larger scale to businesses here that depend on international trade?
Yeah, this is probably the biggest issue with the tariffs in general, and in particular the fluctuating nature of those tariffs and the uncertainty about the legal authorities and how long these things can run. So uncertainty is the enemy of economic expansion. Firms who are unsure what prices they'll pay, what prices they can charge to consumers, are firms that don't invest, that don't expand, that don't hire new people. So Houston area firms are going to be a lot like all the firms in the country, which have been for a lot of the last year, kind of very tepidly moving forward with plans for new locations, new products, new exports, new imports. Everything's kind of a little bit on hold because no one's quite sure what the landscape's going to look like.
Houston, of course, has a massive petrochemical and energy sector that's deeply tied to global markets. How exposed is that industry to tariff policy?
So we're a little more insulated than, say, 20 years ago. Now the U.S. is a major kind of self-sufficient in terms of producing those petrochemicals. That's maybe less problematic worrying about the imports, but it's going to be hitting these firms. You think of the oil services firms, it's the things that go into their work, aluminum, steel, other inputs like that are still subject to tariffs that didn't get struck down over the weekend or last week. The product-specific tariffs still remain in place. So those things that go into putting the pipelines together, putting the refinery plant together, those things remain elevated in terms of costs. And so they're going to be in the same boat where they're going to be a little less willing to expand, a little less willing to hire, a little less willing to take big forward steps until they kind of have some certainty about their costs.
In some cases, we're talking about smaller businesses that do a good deal of importing. That's a big part of their business. And they've been living under this tariff uncertainty one way or another for months now. What's the realistic economic damage to businesses that, have already made decisions about renegotiating contracts, shifting suppliers based off of tariffs that, at least for the moment, have been struck down, while others might then suddenly come into to bear?
Well, this is where the kind of the attrition is going to continue to hit. Like we said, there wasn't like an immediate impact that everything kind of starts falling apart, let's say last year when the initial rounds of tariffs were put in. But it's this creeping attrition. And I think you get to the right point, which is as firms continue, they can't hold out forever until they get certainty. And it's smaller firms that don't have the deep well of financial resources to call on. They don't have, frankly, political connections to people who may be able to find exceptions or do the legal work to tweak the types of products that they're using that to put them not under tariffs or to kind of massage the situation. Those firms they can't hold out forever. And so I think a lot of the anticipation from economists is that these tariff policies will generally be a long run negative, and it's going to take a while, but we're now a year into it, not quite, but about a year into it. And I think this will just continue to be this drag. And it's not going to be surprising that it's not just small firms that maybe have to go out of business, but really the thing we don't see, which is smaller firms that would have started up, but now don't, right? It's not worth going into business. It's not worth, hiving off from your big company to do something really smart and lucrative for yourself if you aren't sure what's going to happen. So we're going to start to see slowdowns in business formation and things like that as well.
The High Court ruled on the legal question, but left this notion of refunds kind of unclear about how that's going to work. But let's assume that businesses do eventually get refunds for whatever increased tariffs they paid over the last year. Is that actually good for the economy, or does it create its own complications?
Well, I mean, there's the whole, like you said, just the whole paperwork issue. Like, how do you even keep track of that and refund everybody? But again, let's say that we do that. Is it a big net effect on the economy? Not really. It's again, it's just moving. It's money that is just getting kind of shifted around between accounts. A lot of what happened in this last year was that a lot of firms didn't pass on huge amounts of the tariff increases to their customers. I think because they were kind of holding out, thinking, let's see how this goes. And I don't want to maybe lose customers over these price increases if I don't have to. So essentially what they'd kind of be doing is paying themselves back for having taken the initial hit. So it's on net, it's probably not a huge difference, but to the point of those maybe small firms who were hanging on, if that check comes back from tariffs they had to pay, that may be allowing them to keep going for another 6 months. And again, kind of plod forward and hope that we get some certainty about how policies will look going into the future.
Still, another wrinkle in all of this is the idea that the administration was counting on revenue from tariffs to, at least in part, offset tax cuts that were in the so-called Big Beautiful Bill. Do you see any risks for the Texas economy, given how much federal spending does still flow through the state? Could we see some of that money go away?
That's almost more of a political question than it is an economic question. It seems unlikely that federal money is going to stop flowing because those kind of decisions, right? We see those decisions about what to spend and how to spend it are really kind of separate from how are we going to fund all that. There was always, it was never going to work that tariffs were going to be a fundamental replacement for the lack of taxation to pay for all that federal spending. Is this going to make that problem a little worse? Yeah. Is it going to fundamentally change the federal budget situation? No. That's a much bigger question that kind of no one has been willing to address for quite a while.
I guess at the heart of all of this is this notion of uncertainty, that the businesses that are affected by tariff policy are finding they can't really predict what's going to come next or when or how. Do you think in a major metro area like Houston that does engage in so much international trade that we might actually see just a reduction in that trade overall to some degree in light of all of that uncertainty?
Yeah, I think that's, like you said, that's really the underlying issue here with these policies. It's we can argue about the wisdom of having tariffs or not or exact level, but it's the uncertainty and the sporadic nature and the unclear legal basis for this that really is one of the issues. And I think that gets into this, like the lack of business formation or kind of businesses expanding or new businesses being created that would take advantage of international trade. I think that's where the slowdown comes. It'll be less obvious that a big existing company is doing less trade. It'll be a little more subtle that we get fewer and fewer firms maybe deciding to take on that uncertainty and risk. And so it will, like I said, kind of this long attrition of drag on economic activity. And Houston is poised to maybe feel that more deeply than other cities or other regions that are less engaged in global activity.
If you were advising a Houston area business that does do a certain degree of importing of either products they sell or parts they use to provide goods to sell, what advice would you give them about what to do over the next few months?
This would be terrible to listen to me to how to run your business, but the oddly cynical answer would be to make sure you have it to get as politically connected as possible, because a lot of what the ways that firms are finding ways around this and being able to have a little certainty is by being excluded from certain things and narrow product categories that somehow now get tariff relief, or specific countries that have distinct deals with better tariff rates. It's navigating this weird minefield of all that stuff. And that is less of an economic question than it is a political question. Like, do you understand the who's who and who can get you those kinds of connections or deals?
Dietrich Vollrath is the chair of the economics department at the University of Houston. Dietrich, thank you very much.
Thanks, Greg.
And up next, a new exhibit tells the stories of Black Houston ball players and the culture surrounding Black baseball here during segregation. We learn more as Houston Matters continues on News 88.7 and YouTube.
Hello, I'm Frank Billingsley. You count on Houston Public Media. That's why you're here right now. Take the next step and become a new member today. Every gift makes a difference. And with a gift of $5 a month or more, you'll receive PBS Passport, a member benefit that lets you stream more of the shows you love anytime. It only takes a minute to make a big difference. Join as a new member today at houstonpublicmedia.org/donate or call 800-364-8300.
Comes from listeners like you and from Baylor College of Medicine. Baylor's work centers on advancing health and medicine through research, education, and patient care.
Join us for Hello Houston, weekdays from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m., taking a deep dive into the stories that matter to Houstonians, keeping you informed, engaged, and entertained, with the generous support from our founding sponsor, Kathy Sanders.
This is Houston Matters. I'm Craig Cohen. A new exhibit at the Freedmen's Town Conservancy seeks to bring to life the role baseball played across generations in Houston's historically black neighborhoods. It's called Blackball, Baseball, Barbecue, and Blues, the untold story of baseball in Houston's Freedmen's Town. The exhibit traces the city's black baseball legacy from sandlots and barnstorming teams to the Negro Leagues and the integration of Major League Baseball, while also highlighting the food, music, faith, and fellowship that surrounded the game. Houston Matters producer Laura Walker recently visited the exhibit and spoke with its curator, Seba Suber.
It's the untold story of baseball in Freedmen's Town. I started working with Houston Freedmen's Town Conservancy, and Sharon Fletcher, the executive director, came. When we first met, she told me about Leroy Grant and the fact that there was a Houston Black Buffaloes, a team, and also West End Park is where the Houston Black Buffaloes and so many players traveled through for the Negro Leagues. So once I had like that baseline, those anchor points of history, at that point I started doing research to try to kind of fill in a full Freedmen's Town, Houston, and even some other parts of the southern region like San Antonio and Austin and even Galveston, to find those teams and players. During the research, I found the Center for Negro League Baseball Research, which is headed by Dr. Leighton Revelle, who is everything baseball, everything Negro League baseball. He has the artifacts, the history, and so I partnered with him to then be able to bring in the research piece of it. And then so it's definitely a combination of research, artifacts, and also just installation by my company.
What were some of the things that you found most interesting while researching?
One of the highlights, and I don't have a lot of information about it, was finding out that there was a team called the Texas Sunflowers, or the Houston Sunflowers, I'm sorry, in 1888. So that is such a small piece of history that we don't know. But I think now that I just had a little tidbit, it's like, okay, I want to know more about the Sunflowers. We also were not able to find photos of the Houston Black Buffaloes. So I think the fact that we were not able to find that research, and Dr. Revelle doesn't have photos, I mean, that tells a lot about the fact that, you know, as a Black American, how it's really difficult to retain in our history and make sure that it's not erased. Those were two definite highlights. And I would also say just reading the Red Book in 1915, just looking at the full world of baseball. That's why the title came with adding in the blues and barbecue, because it was a full community.
So what kind of motivated what we see here? I mean, you've got like you walk in and you see the baseballs. We've got the players. What went into like conceptualizing this exhibit? So
we definitely wanted to have a history of Houston Freedmen's Town, and then at the very beginning, and the link to the Negro Leagues. So, and we also definitely wanted to highlight these anchor points. So Leroy Grant being a native of Freedmen's Town, you can't have any conversation about Negro Leagues without Andrew Rube Foster, who is the father of Black baseball. So that's what you'll find mainly in this first gallery. And then in the second gallery really highlights West End Park and other baseball parks in the Houston area.
Yeah, and then I see, I walked into this other room and there's a connection to Chicago. So how did that connection come about?
So many of the players, even if they migrated, they were born in Texas, so many players played nationally and even global in Cuba. So that's why you'll see so many other teams highlighted, because they would come from Texas, and then you'll see Kansas City Monarchs and different teams in Chicago. So you'll see a combination, which kind of shows the migration patterns.
And then going back to how you've got the baseball, barbecue, and blues, what's something interesting that you found about that connection through, the research with the Red Book of the blues and the barbecue?
Well, this was actually really recent. I found the barbecue link. It was a restaurant, and this is still very new to me, so I don't want to mess up any facts, but there was John and Leela Davis. In the Houston Chronicle, they have an article. They were the founding barbecue family, and they owned Shepherd Barbecue, which was right next to West End Park. And they had a huge love of barbecue, and I have oral history from the restaurant, and they talk about how they would even help the players with funding to travel. So we had to highlight Shepherd Barbecue, which was right here. And also for the blues, we partnered with DJ Flash Gordon Parks, who is an ethnomusicologist and a DJ in Houston. And so he went back and found historical soundscapes of blues players in Freedmanstown, although most of them also migrated to Kansas, Chicago and other places during that time. So when you come and visit, you'll hear historical soundscapes of blues.
Wow, and is there like a piece in the exhibit that's your favorite?
I have many, but I would definitely say I have an installation called The Rebirth of Play. And the Rebirth of Play is a combination of different jerseys. Freedmanstown is the Mother Ward, so you'll see the name Mother Ward and the approximate year that it was established. But we also have 3rd Ward, 5th Ward, Independence Heights, Sunnyside, Frenchtown, Galveston. So many other black settlements and freedom colonies that we kind of look at as these migration patterns and the origins of baseball in the community. So I would say that that's one of my favorite installations, because the point in my brain, at least, is really rebuilding community through play, through joy, through mentorship. Because I look at baseball as not just baseball, but it's multi-generational. We're all coming together to enjoy a sport. So I really want to highlight the idea of a rebirth of play in the African American community, in many communities.
And what's something that you hope that listeners or even people that come to the exhibit will gain from this exhibit?
That's a great question. I would definitely say I really wanted, and it was, I would say, my goal and Houston Freedmanstown's goal to humanize Freedmanstown, because it's a preservation site. So many people know about it as just a historical, the historical nature of it, but we really want to start digging down into the people and the activities and what was actually happening. This exhibition gave us a point to kind of really start the conversation of what were people doing, after emancipation up until the integration.
That was Seba Suber, curator of Blackball, Baseball, Barbecue, and Blues, talking with Houston Matters producer Laura Walker. That exhibit is on view now through June 30th at the Freedmanstown Conservancy. Joining us now is Bob Kendrick, president of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in Kansas City. Bob, good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm all right. And yourself?
Man, it's Monday. It's a beautiful sunny day in Kansas City, but a little chilly. But otherwise, I am good. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
You bet. This exhibit we were just talking about centers on Houston's Freedmanstown as an important but often overlooked site in baseball history. From your perspective, how significant was Houston to the broader Negro Leagues ecosystem?
Well, as the video, and I was watching that very intently because I was learning as that piece was being unfolded. I love the fact that we are able to connect the dots as it relates to Black baseball. You'll be hard-pressed to find any area in this country that wasn't touched by Black baseball at some point in time. And Houston's connection begins in a grassroots kind of capacity, certainly with those teams that weren't necessarily a part of the organized Negro Leagues, but they were very important to community in that area. And that's always exciting to be able to make those connections. And of course, the number of players that came from Texas that gravitated to the Negro Leagues is quite significant. But Houston's connection as it relates to the organized professional Negro Leagues begins and ends very quickly with the Houston Eagles.
Tell us more about the Houston Eagles. What should we know about them and about some of the players that maybe folks of that era would have recognized and followed?
Well, the Houston Eagles were the Newark Eagles. And the Newark Eagles were a juggernaut team in the Negro Leagues prior to integration. And once integration occurred, the rapid decline of that ball club happened. My dear friend, the late great Monty Irvin, who lived and died in Houston, as a matter of fact, starred for the Newark Eagles. And he told me, he says, the minute that Jackie Robinson broke baseball's color barrier, that black fan base that had supported the Newark Eagles instantly went across the river over to Brooklyn because they wanted to see Jackie. And as you can imagine, that was a natural curiosity because black fans wanted to see how their great black stars were going to fare now that they had the opportunity to play at the major league level, because despite what they had done in building the Negro Leagues, successfully, I may add, everybody else thought that the best baseball was being played in the major leagues. So you wanted to get there so you could show everybody just how good you were. And so the Newark Eagles quickly disbanded, and then they moved over to Houston for what turned out to be a very short-lived stint there in Houston from about 1949 to 1950. And Willie Grace was one of the stars there. You had several other great players, but the fan base and the interest and the fact that integration was starting to occur, even though it wasn't as rapid as people would like to believe, because I do think that people think that when Jackie Robinson goes over and joins Brooklyn, that black folks just ran on into the major leagues, but it was a slow, meticulous process. But integration was occurring, and black players were moving into the major leagues, and fan interest followed them to the major leagues.
In the decades that preceded that, during segregation, as you point out, a lot of talent that found its way into the Negro Leagues came from Texas. Can you
Oh, yeah.
Can you note a few examples of that?
Oh, yeah. Well, you have to start with the architect, the legendary Andrew Rube Foster, who was from Calvert, Texas. Rube Foster would organize the Negro Leagues here in a meeting held in Kansas City's Paseo YMCA. As a matter of fact, it's just right around the corner from where the museum currently operates, and we've designated that historic landmark as the home of the future Buck O'Neill Education and Research Center as we save that landmark from the ruins of time. But Rube Foster led a group of 8 independent black baseball team owners into that building, and out of that meeting came the birth of the Negro National League, the first successful organized black baseball league. Rube's brother, Willie Foster, was a dynamic left-handed pitcher, one of the greatest left-handed pitchers in black baseball history. The two brothers are in the National Baseball Hall of Fame. But even when we look at it from a more contemporary standpoint, what about Dallas's own Ernest Banks, the great Ernie Banks? The legendary Cool Papa Bell finds Ernie Banks playing there in Dallas, called the great Buck O'Neill, who was managing the Kansas City Monarchs, and said, "Hey, Buck, I got one for you." And Buck O'Neill's response was, "Can he pick it?" Cool Papa said, "Yeah, he can pick it." And Buck O'Neill signs Ernie Banks sight unseen based on the legendary Cool Papa Bell's recommendation. Now, let me tell you, if Cool Papa Bell recommended you, you probably could play. And Ernie came here to Kansas City. Buck not only, he mentored him, he taught him life skills. He would then send him over, of course, to the Chicago Cubs, where Ernie would become the first African-American player in Chicago Cub baseball history. And so, yeah, there are so many great stars. Smokey Joe Williams, from Seguin, Texas. He threw as hard as anyone. Yeah, now Smokey Joe Williams once struck out 27 members of the Kansas City Monarchs in a 12-inning game. They were playing under the lights, and clearly nobody could see that ball because Smokey Joe was blowing it right past them. He is in the National Baseball Hall of Fame. The legendary Raleigh Biz Mackey from Eagle Pass, Texas, in the National Baseball Hall of Fame. That's just a sampling of that great talent that came out of the state of Texas that had tremendous impact, not just on the Negro Leagues, but they had impact on the game of baseball as we know it today.
As we heard, the exhibit here also emphasizes how baseball existed alongside barbecue, blues, and community gatherings. From what you've seen in your research, how central were those social spaces to the survival and success of black baseball?
Number one, there was nothing recreational about a Negro Leagues game. Oh man, it was the social event of the week. You went to see and you went to be seen. And so that social dynamic is clearly a very pertinent part of this story. Black baseball was supported by black fans tremendously. It was, and particularly when we talk about the Negro Leagues, it was inherently ours, but it was shared with everybody else. And that story resonates with me as it's being couched there in Houston around barbecue and blues. Well, here, barbecue and jazz. And the area that the museum operates, historic 18th and Vine, the historic 18th and Vine Jazz District, was once a very proud, prominent African-American community. And like a lot of urban areas, it died. And it's so interesting that you can trace the demise of many of those urban communities to the loss of the Negro Leagues. The Negro Leagues were an economic catalyst in so many urban areas. And to be quite frank, y'all, I don't know if the African-American community realized what we were losing when we lost the Negro Leagues. But here at 18th and Vine, this is where barbecue originated. Yeah, and the jazz scene was second to none. My dear friend Buck O'Neill tells a wonderful story. Said the Monarchs were playing here in Kansas City on a Saturday afternoon. And after the game, everybody's going to go home. They're going to get cleaned up. They're going to come back to a nightclub here at 18th and Vine called the Subway. And it was called the Subway because the club was actually beneath street level. So as Buck would say, they got to the nightclub, they're sitting around the table, sipping on a little tea. When a kid walks in, he's got a horn over his shoulder. He wants to blow. Well, everybody said, let him blow. Well, Buck said his kid gets up on stage and he starts making some noises out of this horn that they'd never heard before, but you had to pay attention. That kid was 17-year-old Charlie Yardbird Parker, the Bird, who went to high school right up the hill from where the museum operates at Lincoln High School. But that, too, is a great example of the star power that was black baseball. Those black entertainers were a pertinent part of this story. When you come here, you'll see photos of Lionel Hampton, who was a devout Kansas City Monarch fan. You'll see Lena Horne throwing the first pitch out at a game. Cab Calloway had his own semi-pro black baseball team. So did Louis Armstrong, Satchmo. And Satchmo's first love was baseball. He wanted to be a professional baseball player. He just happened to be a better trumpeter.
Bob Kendrick is the president of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in Kansas City. Bob, thanks so much for the time.
Man, it is my pleasure. I got to get to Houston and see this exhibition. I was really intrigued by what I saw in that clip.
All right, thanks so much. Just ahead, we dive into a number of recent developments in K-12 education as Houston Matters continues on News 88.7 and YouTube.
It's not just your car. It's the one that brought your kids home from school, took you cross-country, held memories, laughter, even a few breakdowns. When it's time to let go, give your car a new purpose. Donate it and turn memories into meaningful support for this station. Plus, you'll enjoy free and easy pickup, potential tax benefits, and a simple donation process. Your gift supports the programs you and your family love. Donate today and help keep public media strong. Call or donate online.
Mutual Insurance Company, a workers' compensation provider committed to handling claims to help injured workers get back to work. More at texasmutual.com/mutual care.
And from Base Power, as hurricane season approaches, Base Power offers energy plans to Texans with home backup for outages and fixed energy rates. Eligibility details, basepowercompany.com/NPR.
This is Houston Matters. I'm Craig Cohen. From the vouchers rollout to SB 11 votes and more, there's been a lot going on these days in K-12 education in Houston and across Texas. Let's catch you up now on some of those developments with the help of Houston Public Media's education reporter, Bianca Seward, the Houston Chronicle's senior Houston ISD reporter, Megan Menchaca, and Jaden Edison, public education reporter with the Texas Tribune. Welcome to you all.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Jaden, let me start with you and with something that you just reported on. On Friday, a federal court temporarily blocked the Houston, Katy, and Plano school districts from enforcing parts of a state law banning DEI initiatives in K-12 schools. Why?
Yeah, well, certainly I think in the court ruling, it was pretty clear that the court felt like none of the districts made an argument for why something else should happen. And so certainly the court made clear and said that basically it's not the court's job to lay out arguments, for or against the particular law, though it did note the complexities of the law and how detailed it is and how it's representative of these debates that are being had, across the country. And so certainly, according to my reading of the ruling, the court felt like its hands, were tied and certainly ended up ruling, in favor of the organizations that brought the lawsuit, while also removing Texas Education Commissioner Mike Morath as a defendant, which means that certainly that ruling and the temporary blockage of the law only applies to the 3 districts and not the other districts throughout the rest of the state.
All right, Bianca, let's talk about school vouchers. The application period for families to apply for private school vouchers began earlier this month, continues until March 17th. How's it going so far?
There's been a lot of interest. We were well over 100,000 people that have applied or shown interest in the program, which means we are going to hit that lottery system. This is something that they had expected. The comptroller's office expected to have a couple 100,000, maybe more, families apply for the program. So there will now be a lottery system where people are kind of grouped into categories based on income, based on special education needs, and then they'll be prioritized based on that to see who gets a seat or gets one of these lottery
And it's
vouchers.
limited because they set aside $1 billion towards this program in its first year, but that's it.
They did. They set aside $1 billion, which is a large amount of money, and that is a big voucher program. But as we've seen in other states, it's usually an underestimation when there's high interest and these programs grow, and we end up seeing how much actually is requested. So, yeah, the lottery system was expected, put in place. They're kind of ready for this.
Jaden, will private schools now being funded in part by taxpayer dollars be subject to any of the same oversight as public schools?
Certainly not to the same extent. I think that's part of the, appeal that really the comptroller has tried to put out, and lawmakers as well, is that, now we're at, over 2,000 private schools that have opted into the program. One of those appeals is obviously at least, right, $10,000+ in taxpayer dollars, up to $30,000, for students with disabilities, depending on how much it would have cost to educate them in a public school. But when you think about the things that, parents and families think about, right, the big thing folks have obviously talked about is testing, right? Everybody has talked about the STAR test, here in Texas. Certainly private schools have to take administer nationally recognized exams, but are not held, to the standard of having to take, the STAR test. When you think about federal law as it relates to accommodations for students with disabilities, right? Private schools do not have to abide by state and federal law, in that realm. And so certainly, there's a lot of questions about that. But, when you think about all the various restrictions in public schools, if you think about, for example, we were talking about before, SB 12, diversity, equity, inclusion legislation, something like that wouldn't apply to, a private school. If you think about, laws that, mandate the 10 Commandments to be posted in public schools, that does not apply to private schools. And so certainly there's a lot of flexibility, with those schools when it comes to taking part in this program.
Megan, HISD's Board of Managers is scheduled to vote this week on the closure of 12 HISD schools. Why are they being closed?
Sure. So there's 2 reasons that Superintendent McMiles has laid out for why these schools are being closed. One of them is declining enrollment. Houston ISD has seen a decade-long enrollment decline. Like many other districts in Houston and in Texas, that has been accelerated during the state takeover. The district has seen, particularly in new education system schools, which are these schools targeted for reform, more students leaving these schools, but it's not a McMiles problem, the enrollment in HISD. It's a Texas school district's problem, in part with vouchers, in part with competition from charter schools, homeschooling. But HISD is one of several districts, Austin, that are closing schools. So that's one of the reasons. The other reason is that these facilities are quite poor. Some of these schools are decades old and haven't seen meaningful renovations or upgrades in a long time. So Houston ISD is closing these schools for two reasons. What's notable is that they said in November that they weren't going to close schools, and now they're giving communities about 2 weeks' notice before they vote to formally close their school at the end of the school year.
You mentioned competition from charter schools, and on Friday you and your colleagues reported on how when you look at the dozen schools that are targeted for closure here, there's some 50 charter schools that surround them. Why is that significant?
Yeah, because what I think particularly is notable that there's 12 charter schools that have opened in the past decade while HISD's enrollment has declining. People are, for a variety of reasons, not just the state takeover, but people are opting into charter schools maybe because they see them as a better option education-wise. They like, maybe the specialty that the charter schools offers, but there's 50 charter schools that surround these schools targeted for closure, and they're basically causing competition. HISD is no longer the only game in town. Families have different choices, and those charter schools are competing because they're funded by students. So they're competing for those students. They're competing for those dollars. And Houston ISD is losing that case to many of those students.
HISD is also turning to nonprofits to oversee higher performing schools. What's that all about?
Sure. So Houston ISD is losing about $60 million a year because of this declining enrollment, and they need money. They're pursuing pretty much every available avenue that they can to get more money, and one of those is Senate Bill 1882 that provides an additional $1,000 per student to fund under SB 1882 if the district pursues those partnerships. So in part, the district has sold this as we want to give these schools more autonomy. We want them to have more flexibility. But they've also made the cases, we need more money. Under the state law, we can get $1,000 per student. All we have to do is give up some control to a nonprofit. They see it as a real win for the district's finances.
Bianca, district boards statewide have until March 1st to hold votes on SB 11. This is the law that gives them authority to establish voluntary prayer periods during the school day. Many are turning it down, but one Houston area district last week approved it.
Yeah, right? Magnolia ISD has approved it. It's the only one in the Houston area, and we're in the single digits for school districts that have adopted this across the state so far. We saw one outside of Dallas. I think that's the Keller ISD, and a couple of others. But many have opted to keep things as they are in place. They have the moment of silence. They say they don't limit students from praying like before tests or when they want to step out. So a lot of school districts, and I've listened to dozens, if not more, school board meetings now to see how this kind of has been debated, just feel it's unnecessary. And not only that it would be more cumbersome for the district to adopt this policy and set aside time, take time away from the instructional period to allow the students to have this period of prayer. So by and large, it's not being adopted. It's been debated as unnecessary, cumbersome to the districts. I don't see it as a very successful initiative right now since so few districts have chosen to adopt it.
There's one other thing I wanted to make sure we brought up today. There have been a rash of student protests statewide lately. How come?
Yeah, a lot of students are taking to making walkouts popular to protest ICE demonstrations in Houston and across the country. And the Texas Education Agency, we've talked about this before, has set aside some pretty serious consequences for district teachers and students who demonstrate.
Yeah, Jaden, what has the TEA had to say? How have they been reacting?
Yeah, well, at the urging of the governor, certainly the agency has started kind of looking into these things. And they put out a memo a couple weeks ago, which was really interesting, right? Basically warning districts that, in any districts that the agency finds, have quote unquote encouraged, students to basically, be involved, politically as they have with these walkouts, they could be subject to sanctions, right? They've talked about investigations into teachers, right, which could lead to, the revoking of a teacher's certification here in Texas. They've talked about obviously students being marked absent, which we've already seen, in districts, throughout the state, and potential losses of state funding, which, that has particular, legal questions and ramifications associated, with it. And then obviously, most drastically, which folks have spoken about is, the threat of, school intervention, the state takeover, like obviously, we've seen in Houston, which that's interesting, right? The agency hasn't necessarily laid out new sets of rules that didn't already exist, because certainly the commissioner has such broad authority when it comes to what are known as quote unquote special investigations, right? As the commissioner determines necessary, can look into a district for any number of reasons. And as a result of that, that could, result in, for example, the replacement of a district's elected school board with the state appointed board of managers, as they've called here. But certainly, the governor has given this a lot of attention, and, Education Commissioner Mike Morath, who was appointed by the governor, has certainly, follow, those directives and certainly, try to get ahead of this by putting out these warnings to districts to make clear that the agency does not want to see, districts, encouraging protests. Though it's important to note that many districts have come out and said that that's not at all, what was happening. And certainly, top of mind for them, as they have articulated, is making sure that students are safe if they are going to be engaged in this way.
To put it lightly, it's never a dull moment in K through 12 education. Jaden Edison is a public education reporter with the Texas Tribune. Bianca Seward covers education for Houston Public Media. Megan Menchaca is the Houston Chronicle senior Houston ISD reporter. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And still to come, we recap the Winter Olympics with Houston Chronicle sports editor Reid Laymance. Stay with us as Houston Matters continues on News 88.7 and YouTube.
We know you value.
We know you value Houston Public Media. That's why you're watching right now. So take the next step and become a new member of the station you rely on. Every gift makes a difference. And what matters most right now is supporting the station that brings you the news and information you rely on. It only takes a minute to make a big difference. So join as a new member today at houstonpublicmedia.org/donate or call 800-364-8300.
Media comes from the 2025-2026 In-Print Brown Reading Series, presenting Booker Prize winner George Saunders, reading from his new novel, Vigil, Wednesday, February 25th. More at inprint.org.
Houston Matters with Craig Cohen is made possible in part by Ellen Benninghoven and Dr. Michael Schaefer, and with gifts from listeners like you. Sunny, low 60s for the high 50 right now here at News 88.7.
The Winter Olympics wrapped up Sunday in dramatic fashion, with the United States earning its first gold medal in men's hockey since 1980, defeating Canada in 2-1 in overtime in what became an instant classic. Team USA won gold in both men's and women's hockey, both times over our neighbors to the north. To discuss that and other Olympic highlights, we're joined now by Reid Laymance, sports editor for the Houston Chronicle. Reid, good morning.
Hello.
Connor Hellebuck stopped 41 shots. Jack Hughes, after losing teeth from a high stick earlier in the game, scored the overtime game winner Sunday. I was at one of the watch parties that were going on around town. Certainly hockey fans were watching this. But does a game like this sometimes convert new fans to a sport?
You know, I think every 4 years we get into hockey, and it's just the emotions were so high, and it's something that the Olympics just brings out, and it's just really fun to watch. I mean, it was that way with the women's game. I mean, the U.S.-Canada women have a very long rivalry, and just, it really looked bad for the U.S. till just the last few seconds. And Hillary Knight, the captains, just deflected in a goal to tie, and they won in overtime. But yeah, just the reaction and the joy that you see in the players is very amazing, especially with the men who are all in the NHL. And, Hellebuck, he plays for Winnipeg in Canada, so he'll be back playing for a Canadian team this week.
Yep. You mentioned the fascination that some maybe non-hockey fans have with hockey every 4 years. For me, that quadrennial fascination is with curling. Mm-hmm. It's something I don't pay attention to, and then the Olympics roll around, and I can't help but watch. Yeah. These were the first games, though, where the cameras and the microphones captured things that I think some folks in that sport would prefer it hadn't. What happened?
Oh, well, there was, athletes have opinions on many things, and so sometimes they mention those a lot. I know one of the curlers from Minnesota like to talk about the situation going on there, and, there were reports of Canada where they doing something wrong with the curling and whatnot. So, Yeah, the Olympics are under just a bigger microscope than they've ever been. I always like to joke there's two kinds of Olympics. There's the Olympics you see in person, and then there's the Olympics you watch on TV. And now I think there's a third element. It's the Olympics you see on social media.
Right. Figure skating saw a lot of quad jumps attempted, not as many landed as many fans had hoped, in particular for the much-hyped quad god, Ilya Malinin. What happened there?
Well, I was lucky enough. I was there the day for his short program when everything went well. His long program, just nothing happened. He just said he had a mental block. It just fell apart, and in many ways, he felt like he just choked. And it was very interesting. Simone Biles was at the Olympics, and we all know what her situation during Tokyo Games were with taking away a break. So she talked with Ilya a lot, and counseled him some. And at the end of the Olympics, they do have just kind of a skating exhibition, and I think he was out there skating free during that.
And we could probably anticipate maybe seeing him again, even 4 years' time. Take another shot at it. Norway's Johannes Klæbo became the first athlete to win 6 gold medals at a single Olympic Winter Games. He swept all the cross-country events, and he now has a career 11 Winter Olympic gold medals. Does it get more dominant than that?
It's like cross-country is one of those sports we only look at every 4 years, but it's really fun to watch, actually, when you get out there to see it. And no, it's just amazing what he does. In Norway in general, they won the overall medal race this year. But I think it is very interesting that the U.S. was second overall in medals with 12 golds. It kind of reminded me, I had to look it back up, but in 1988, that was the first Winter Olympics I covered. The U.S. only had 6 medals overall, and boy, did that cause problems. George Steinbrenner got involved. But it was actually, give the boss credit. They created a whole new program and increased training facilities across the U.S. for things. And the U.S. number 2 in winter sports.
So anything else that stood out to you while you were there at the Olympics or just overall that you think is worth noting? Yeah, no, I think, 2 things kind of got to me. One was one of the U.S. figure skaters, Max Naumoff. His parents died in a plane crash, which it was that horrible crash in the D.C. area where a helicopter hit an American Airlines plane, and many members of the skating club of Boston were on that plane, and his parents were his coaches, and so he lived with that, but he kind of went into just as you normally would, but he got back into the sport, and he felt like he was skating with them. They were there watching him almost, in a sense. But just watching him handle that and how he talked about it and trying to be an inspiration for others to overcome was really great. The other thing I really liked was the women's snowboard halfpipe. Chloe Kim, she was ballyhooed going for her 3rd gold. And, she was right there in the lead. A Korean snowboarder passed her on the next to last run. And she had a chance to win, but she ended up finishing second. But her first reaction was to go congratulate the Korean who won. And so you see those little Olympic moments of just, athletes sharing joy with each other. Reid Laymance covered this year's Olympics. He's the sports editor for the Houston Chronicle. Thanks so much for the time.
Sure. Thank you.
And that will do it for today's show. The Houston Matters team includes Michael Haggerty, Joshua Zinn, Brenda Valdivia, Mincho Jacob, and Laura Walker. Jared Carroll's our technical director. On tomorrow's show, we discuss historic preservation in Houston amid concern about the fate of the former Garden Oaks Theater. Also, we talk with an area immigration attorney about Houstonians pursuing dual citizenship. And we preview this week's Urban Souls Dance Company Black History Month concert. I'm Craig Cohen. Join us tomorrow for those and other Houston Matters.